Hi, sociologist. Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Soc 204. We're going to talk about some classic theorists, some of the founding fathers, and I should say Chapter 1 of your Giddens textbook also includes important founding mothers like Harriet Martineau and important people like W.E.B. Du Bois. So hopefully people are looking at Giddens. There's some really good stuff in that first chapter about some of these founding fathers. We're going to tackle some that are related to the paradigms that we've been discussing, and so let's just jump right into it because I don't waste too much time because then I have to upload more stuff. So we're going to look at some of the big names in sociology, and we're going to start with a functionalist. So remember, functionalists see the world as an organism and ask if things are functional or dysfunctional. And so the first name here, we're just going to briefly mention this guy, Herbert Spencer, 1820 to 1903. He was sort of the first kind of Enlightenment thinker in sociology to really kind of attach Darwin's notion of the organism and thinking about the huge influence of Darwin, right? Darwin was like the Beatles of his time, so everybody was having their mind blown by Darwin about how society is organic. There's an organic element, and each part has a function, and that there's a slow evolutionary history. So Spencer really is kind of the father of functionalism. And so that's all you really need to know about Spencer. But the big name here is Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim, strange little Frenchman, born in 1858, died in 1917. Durkheim came from a long line of rabbis. And there's a theme here, there's an interesting theme here that pops up that I want to kind of hit on early on, is that there are a lot of Jewish scholars in social sciences, and sciences in general, but especially in social sciences. There's a lot of people, and one of the reasons, there's a couple of reasons for that. Like, why is there such an overrepresentation of Jewish thinkers in the foundation of sociology? Well, one of the reasons is you have a culture where you have to learn at a very early age to read because you're translating the Torah when you're 3. So, if you have a high rate of literacy, those folks are going to do well in higher education, be more well read. So that might be part of it. But another part of it, and this goes to the kind of one of the core ideas of sociology, is being on the outside. In a WASP society or a WASC, Catholic, white Anglo-Saxon Catholic society, where it's Protestant or Catholic, if you're Jewish, you're kind of an outsider. And if you're on the outside, you have kind of a observation point to look in. Sort of like if you go to another country that's not your country, you're probably going to notice some things that the people who've lived there all their lives have never noticed, because there's this old saying, a fish doesn't know it's in water until you take it out of water. So by virtue of being a person in a society where Jews are kind of marginalized and kept on the outside of the mainstream religious cultural thought, the war on Christmas and all that good stuff, you have sort of a perspective. So in a way, it's not stereotyping, but there's sort of an inherent sociological imagination that comes with being a member of a minority religion, including Judaism. So I just want to mention that because you might notice a little pattern emerge. So Durkheim comes from a long line of rabbis and is very interested in some of these ideas that Spencer brought up about what are the functions of things. What are the functions of things? So we talked about last class, is crime functional? That was Durkheim. Durkheim said crime can be a product of dysfunction in society, but it also can be functional. So we used the example of Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and Michael Hardwick helped us to sodomize each other. So the most famous thing that Durkheim is known for is his 1897 study on suicide. And this is a perfect example. Oh, I hear an essay question. This is a perfect example of the connection between the micro and the macro. I mean, what is more micro than suicide, right? I mean, suicide, to be or not to be, you're contemplating your existence on the earth. It's just you alone, trying to decide if you're going to live or die. Very micro. He thought that there might be a macro level connection to this. And so what he did, Comte had all these the father of sociology had these sort of great theories. He was very rational, but he needed the extra element to make the Enlightenment work, which was empiricism, right? That was Galileo, took the rational theory and did some research and said, hey, I think we're going around the sun. So in a way, Durkheim is the real father of sociology because he was the one who did the empirical research. So how did he explore this? He was looking for these macro level patterns, and in 1890s Paris, there wasn't a lot of social science being done, so he had to kind of make it up as he went along, and he wanted to find data. He wanted to find records about deaths and why people killed themselves. What did he have? Well, in those days, the best records were kept by the church. The church recorded births, right? Somebody's born in a parish, and that gets recorded. They record marriages. They record divorces if they're legal, and they record deaths. These are all things that the churches keep records of. So he traveled around France and looked at various churches and found, where were the suicides, and he started to find patterns. The more he looked, the more he traveled around France, he started to notice some patterns. The first pattern he found, so this is the macro level pattern, this very micro level thing. The first pattern he found is there was a big difference between suicide rates among Catholics and suicide rates among Protestants. And again, we talked about the Protestant Reformation. Protestantism covers a whole bunch of people, including Episcopalians and Baptists and Methodists and Calvinists and on and on and on. But generally, Protestants, Catholics had a higher suicide rate than each other, or different suicide rates. So which one do you think had the higher suicide rate, Catholics or Protestants? If you said Catholics because they're guilty all the time, you would be wrong. The Protestants had a higher suicide rate. The Protestants had a higher suicide. They tried to figure out why, if this is such an individualistic thing, why are these macro level patterns? And the term that he came up with, and this is key, and we're going to talk about this term a lot, is the term anomie. Anomie. The sense of normlessness. The sense of norms are rules. We'll get into this. Norms are rules. The sense of normlessness. What do we mean by that? Well, if you know anything about the Catholic faith, which I think some of you probably do, there is a lot of ritual in the Catholic Church. If you've been to a Catholic wedding, be prepared to be there for a few hours. There's a lot of standing and sitting. There's all kinds of rituals. There's, the Our Father and Hail Mary, and there's genuflecting, and the Stations of the Cross, and going to confession, and midnight mass, and all your saints, and on and on. And there's just tons of ritual. There are tons of rules. There are tons of norms. So there's lots of norms. For the Protestant faith, the idea of the Protestant faith, if you remember from our discussion of the Protestant Reformation, is, hey, you can read the Bible now. Go figure it out for yourself. My grandmother loved to say, Randy, we don't have religion. We're Presbyterian. There's the Bible. Go figure it out. There isn't the same amount of ritual among the Protestant faiths. So the Catholic faith had all these rituals. The loving arms of the Virgin. I always love that line. Protestant, not so much. The Protestant folks experienced anomie, the sense of normlessness. So if I was feeling depressed and suicidal, if I'm Catholic, I've got this whole world that I could plug into. I've got lots of, going to visit the priest and going to find, the Station of the Cross to pray to, and there's all this sort of ritual. And that's going to keep you from committing suicide. If you're Protestant, it's the Bible, go figure it out. You don't have as much to hold you in, and therefore you're experiencing anomie. Higher rates of anomie equals higher rates of suicide. So that was one of the big patterns that he found. Catholics have lower suicide rates because they have lower anomie. Protestants have higher suicide rates because they have more anomie. The other pattern that he found was the difference between people who lived in the city and people who lived in the country. Which one of those do you think had a higher suicide rate? People that lived in the city or people that lived in the country? If you said people that lived in the city, you'd be right. And not just because they have taller buildings to jump off of. The idea of living in the country is there's less anomie. Everybody kind of knows everybody. Everybody goes to grandma's for dinner on Sunday. Everybody kind of knows each other's sort of gossip and business, and there's sort of more of a community. But in the city, even though there's more people, you can be all alone in the city, and you can experience that anomie the same as Protestants do, and therefore when you're depressed, you're more likely to commit suicide. So there were these patterns that were really explaining the connection of the micro-macro. There was another version of anomie as well, and this had to do with the rate of rapid change. And we sort of alluded to this a little bit when we were talking about the functionalist paradigm, that when things change really fast. Because remember, functionalists want slow evolutionary change. But when things change really fast, you're going to get more anomie and you're going to get a higher suicide rate. So what Durkheim was talking about in 1897 was people were moving from the country to the city. People were moving from farms and going to work in factories. This was the time of the Industrial Revolution. So what had been the way of life in Europe for hundreds and hundreds of years suddenly was being wiped off the map. And also is the movement towards democracy, right? We were getting rid of kings and queens and moving into self-governship. So all this change was happening very quickly. So there was this anomie and people were kind of out of sorts. And this is one of the reasons that people are talking about Durkheim right now. I mean, we are experiencing so much anomie. We have anomie around technology. How quickly is technology changing? There are people who still have MySpace pages. I don't believe it, but apparently. There are people who have flip phones. This technology is changing so fast. How do you keep up with the latest? This is not the latest iPhone, by the way. How do you keep up with all the new technology? It creates this sense of normlessness. I experience this anomie and all this technology we have around social media. What do I do when laptops start opening in a classroom? I mean, I know in this classroom you're sitting in front of your laptop or your phone. But one of the things that I do when we're in a physical classroom is I tell people to shut those laptops. I know you're not focused on me in the lecture when you have a laptop open. You're doing what I would do, which is checking your Facebook page or downloading porn or something like that. I actually had that happen one time in the class. I had a student complain that a guy in front of her was looking at porn during class. We're like, no more laptops. There is this rapid change. We're experiencing rapid change around our demographics. The future is brown, man. I mean, America is becoming a much more demographically diverse place, less waspy. And there's some people that are freaking out about that. We're going to talk about this. They wear little hats that say "Make America White Again," and it's going through changes in terms of sexual orientation. There's more gay people. It's not that there's more gay people. It's just that people feel safe about being out, and so. That's a big change that's happened very quickly, and more transgender people and women. There's more women working in this economy than men. Well, I don't know about this economy because it's pretty much in the crapper. But so we're going through this rapid change, and it was very interesting that Durkheim made a big comeback in 1994, April 1994. I shouldn't laugh because it was just a gut-wrenching moment. Some people might know the singer Kurt Cobain, singer of Nirvana. I've got plenty of his records up here. Oh, I was a huge fan. I got to see them play many times. Got to meet him once. Just love the guy. And in April of 1994, I took a shotgun and blew his brains out. And all of a sudden, he was on the cover of Time magazine. He was on the cover of Newsweek. And both of those magazines talked about Durkheim. They talked about Durkheim in the sense of anomie, this original study of suicide, and how we can feel lost when change is happening too fast and don't have ritual to bind us and are more likely to commit suicide. So, we're really talking a lot about Durkheim now. I mean, not only does it explain Kurt Cobain 20, 30 something years ago, oh my God, a long time ago, 1994, it explains the Trump thing. The Trump thing is a complete response to anomie in America. All these changes that we've been going through so quickly, a lot of people are freaking out about their anomie. They might not use that word, but they're freaking out about their anomie, and they want to go back to some mythical past when everything made sense. So they didn't have to worry about transgender bathrooms and feminist policies, and so they want to go back because of anomie. So Durkheim is hugely useful. He is just so. I mean, he was pretty useful in 100 years ago. But he actually died a little over 100 years ago. Yeah, 2017 was the 100th anniversary of his death. So super useful in 1897 and even more useful now. So that's a little bit of Durkheim. Let me talk about another theorist who is a little bit of a conflict theorist and a little bit of a functionalist theorist. And his name is Max Weber. Max Weber was a German sociologist, so it's Weber. It's spelled like Weber. But like Wagner, it's not Wagner, if you're listening to Wagner. Weber is German, so you say Weber. If somebody says Max Weber, you're like, you don't know. 1864 to 1920. And Weber was a very prolific sociologist as well in the early 20th century. Wrote tons and tons. Very interested in the things that Karl Marx had to say, which we'll talk about in a minute. He was a guy who, for example, believed that bureaucracy, something that was kind of new in the 20th century, was functional. I mean, think about bureaucracy. What comes to mind when you think about bureaucracy? Right? Think about all the bureaucracy at PCC, all the lines you have to stand in line for, the virtual lines, I guess. To get registered for a class, to get your financial assistance, to get your requirements. I mean, there's all this paperwork. Now it's sort of paperwork like this. Think about all the bureaucracy around owning a car, right? You got to have the emissions inspection. You got to have your driver's license. You got to have your tags. You got to have your insurance. I drove by the DMV today because I had to go to Lowe's, and the line at the what a horrible time to have to go to the DMV. They're only letting like 2 people in at a time. Was like a half a mile long. It's just the DMV. It sucks. When we think bureaucracy, you get like a really bad feeling. But his argument was it's functional. In a complex society, you need all these hoops to jump through. You need to get all the paperwork and to make sure people have their licenses and are registered. And it's not pleasant, but it's sort of a necessary evil. That bureaucracy is functional for the functioning of a complex society. You need bureaucracy. So he's kind of a functionalist. And here's the big thing that he was known about. We're going to come back to Weber too. But here's one of the big things he was interested in. Also very interested in religion, as we'll talk about over and over again. Sociologists are just sort of obsessed with religion. He was interested about capitalism. This notion of capitalism. Oh, we've got a little guest. This notion of capitalism and why capitalism emerged when it did and when it did. So capitalism, look, there's a lemur. Capitalism, if we think about capitalism is the notion of entrepreneurship, that you can start a business and you can get rich. The person that started Starbucks, the person that started Google, that you can start a business and build that business into something and build wealth through it. So why did that happen in Europe kind of, in the 1800s when it happened, or 1700s? Why did it really sort of start then? Hey, Cozy, how you doing? So he thought religion might play a factor in it. He had this idea that religion might play a factor. So this is the question: why did capitalism merge when and where? You can take Gene Simmons. And so the first thing he did is he compared sort of Eastern religions and Western religions. And so if you think of Eastern religions, you think of things like Shintoism and Buddhism and Hinduism, Taoism, and Western religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism. Eastern religions, when you think of Eastern religions, they're much more inwardly oriented. They are, think of the yogi meditating on a mountaintop, contemplating his or her navel. And so there's much more of an inward orientation, the focus on the being. Western religions, like Islam and Judaism, that's Gene Simmons. Do you know the name of the band that guy is in? I'll give you a hint. Kiss. Can you say Kiss Rocks?
Kiss Rocks.
Yeah, Kiss Rocks. Okay. Anyway, Western religions are much more social and outwardly oriented. So inward versus outward orientations of Eastern versus Western religion. But it's not just Western religions in general. It is, what's that lemur's name, Coz? Lisa the lemur. Right on. It happens at a particular time. And the time that sort of capitalism really starts to emerge is really with the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. When Protestantism emerges, you start to get what we think of as modern entrepreneurial capitalism. So, can I do this, Coz? Let me do this, and then we'll take a break. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're a Catholic, there's this notion of predetermination. That if you're Catholic, you get baptized. It's very important to get baptized if you're Catholic, because that gets you into heaven. Someone hasn't been baptized yet. It's causing much distress among the Catholic family members. Hey, Coz. But this idea that you can get into heaven just by being baptized, and that's it. You're in. You're in. And there are, there's been variations of that. I mean, for a while in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church was selling what were called indulgences, so you could buy your way into heaven. Gave the church enough money, you get a good seat in heaven. Protestantism is very different. Protestantism, you have to earn your way into heaven. You have to work your way into heaven. You have to sort of make sure you live a good life and work hard, and don't go crazy with your money. Instead of giving it to the church, you're going to work hard with your money, but you're going to get to keep it. So there's this notion of the Protestant work ethic. This is key to understanding this, the Protestant work ethic. The Protestant work ethic says, if I want to go to heaven, if I want to get into the afterlife and live forever and all the great stuff that's supposed to be available in heaven, like an endless, I don't know, buffet table, I guess, that I got to work hard. But here's where it all comes together. If I'm working hard, if I have this Protestant work ethic, work, so I can be rewarded in the afterlife, and I'm getting paid for that work, and I'm tithing a little bit to the church, but I'm not giving it all to the church. What am I doing with that money? What am I doing with the money? I'm working hard. I'm getting paid. What am I doing with that money? Putting it in that's right, a bank. A bank. Do you have savings accounts? Hope you have savings accounts. You put it in a savings account, right? You put that money away for a rainy day. When I was a kid, a little bit older than this, when I was a kid, my dad started a savings account for me when I was about 10 years old, I guess. And I put my money in the bank. I put my, lawn mowing money in the bank, or money, whatever, my allowance money, I put it in the bank. And my thought was that money is in the bank, right? It's in the safe. Like the $20 that I put in the bank is in the safe, and I can go visit it. Beep, beep, beep. But that's not how it works. What does the bank do with the money that you put in your savings account? It lends it, right? It lends it out to people who want to buy cars, who want to start businesses, who want to buy homes. That money in the bank that comes from the Protestant work ethic, from these Protestants working really hard and putting their money in the bank, gets loaned out. So if I want to start a business, I'm like, hey, I have an idea for a business. I want to start a burrito carts in Portland. I go to the bank and say, hey, here's my business plan. I have an idea of how this works. Can you give me $10,000 to get started with this business, and I'll pay you back plus interest? That's capitalism. That's capitalism. So he writes this book called the Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. 1920, I think it came out. Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. No, that name is key to it, to explain why capitalism happened. A latent function of the Protestant Reformation was not just people had a different way of thinking other than the Catholic Church. All of a sudden, they were putting money in the bank. That really didn't happen under the Catholic rule. When the Protestants came along, people were working so they could get into heaven. They didn't have the idea that you're baptized and so you're automatically in. So they're working, putting that money in the bank, and then the bankers could loan that money out to entrepreneurs. And that's how capitalism starts. It's the birth of modern capitalism as a latent function of the Protestant Reformation. So Weber, in a very macro level, explains, looking at the religions of the world, how this thing called capitalism emerged as sort of a happy accident because of these Protestants who were putting their money in the bank. All right, we're going to take a little break and get back to some other theorists. Are you eating a carrot? That's good. And we'll be back with more classic theorists. Say goodbye, Gracie.